welcome back to my X-Men series. For those of you who are new here, I'm going through each of the X-Men movies and reviewing them one by one. This is coinciding with the series' 20th anniversary and the release of the final film in the franchise, The New Mutants, which I have now seen, and I'll have a review for that out by the end of all this. Let me know what you think of the X-Men movies in the comments below, and make sure to give this a thumbs up if you like these reviews. It helps me out immensely if you do that. I already reviewed the first 8 movies, and I'll leave a link to the playlist in the description in case you missed any of them. And if you're new here, please consider hitting that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with my reviews of the rest of the franchise, as well as some new releases. But now let's talk about the 9th film, X-Men Apocalypse. Taking place in the 1980s, this sees the godlike mutant Apocalypse, played by Oscar Isaac, awaken after being entombed for thousands of years. Believing humanity has lost its way, he seeks out 4 mutants, including Magneto, once again played by Michael Fassbender, to help him destroy the world and remake it in his image. It's now up to Xavier, once again played by James McAvoy, and the X-Men to put a stop to all this. Even though this was released in 2016, it was pretty much in the works since even before Days of Future Past was out. By that point, the Marvel Cinematic Universe completely changed the game of how superhero movies operated, with a focus on world building and whole slates of movies announced as being in the works years before even seeing release. And Fox followed suit, with this film being teased during the Days of Future Past credits. And there was a fair amount of hype around this one. The last 2 ensemble films breathed new life into the franchise, and with Days of Future Past resetting most of the film's continuity, it opened the way for these films with the younger cast to do as they saw fit without being held down by what came before them. The same production team from Days of Future Past was brought back for this, and with Apocalypse being one of the most powerful villains in the Marvel Comics, it looked as if this was going to be another superhero epic. And how wrong we were about that. Now, to be clear, I don't hate this movie. I actually don't even dislike this movie, but it is a massive disappointment. It's kind of on the same level as The Last Stand, where it's simply an entertaining blockbuster and really nothing more. And even then, I think The Last Stand went about it a little better, as problematic as that movie was. Both the original 2 X-Men films, as well as the first 2 prequel movies, no matter how fun or how serious they may get, always circle back to having a theme. They usually revolve heavily around discrimination in some form, and what happens when those with prejudiced views gain too much power. We saw that with the Mutant Registration Act, Stryker, the Sentinels, and even real-world events like the Cold War or the Vietnam War coming into play. This has none of that. If anything, this is much more formulaic in nature and doesn't have nearly as much depth as the other ensemble films. It's essentially just this rescue mission. Apocalypse gets the 4 mutants, known as the 4 Horsemen, kidnaps Xavier, and the rest of the X-Men have to go rescue him. That's the entire crux of this film. Not to say that it doesn't have a little bit of emotion here and there. Probably one of the best aspects of the film is the focus on Magneto in the first act. He settled down with a new family after the events of Days of Future Past, and he's attempting to turn over a new leaf. And I thought this was well done, especially given that Magneto made for one of the more interesting antagonists in all of X-Men, seeing as how he really has a heart deep down, even if it's heavily misguided. So when he does something we don't agree with, we at least understand where he's coming from. And whenever his more humane side is explored in any of the movies, that's always one of the most intriguing aspects about this universe. We even expand a little upon Mystique, once again played by Jennifer Lawrence. The struggle we see surrounding her relationships with both Xavier and Magneto is mostly put to the side here. Instead, this focuses on how she's now one of the biggest heroes in the mutant world, given how history was rewritten at the end of Days of Future Past, and she publicly stopped an assassination. So we see her trying to deal a little with her unwanted fame and glory. Though both her storyline as well as Magneto's only goes so far once Apocalypse finds Xavier and kidnaps him, and from there the film becomes fairly one-dimensional. Now, there are moments of exciting action and suspense that made this a decent, though problematic, experience. From a purely entertainment point of view, it at least succeeds on that front. Probably one of my favorite sequences is early on when we see Quicksilver, once again played by Evan Peters, come back into the picture. The film takes everyone's favorite sequence from Days of Future Past, where we saw everything in slow motion except for him, and he's running around saving people, and replicates that here. It's a much longer sequence than in Days of Future Past, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't smile as he's saving people while the song Sweet Dreams Are Made of These is playing in the background. Quicksilver also has a little bit of backstory of his own here, but similar to Mystique and Magneto, it feels like it's only explored so much. He crosses paths with the X-Men once again because he learns Magneto's his father, and he wants to meet him and learn more about him. But like everything else, this gets tossed to the side after a certain point and is only sporadically brought up later on. This is the longest film in the entire X-Men franchise, running at nearly 2.5 hours, and it introduced us to a ton of new characters. We get younger versions of Cyclops, Storm, Nightcrawler, and Jean Grey, along with being introduced to Psylocke, Jubilee, and Angel, who we're not totally sure is the same version of the character we met in The Last Stand. That's never clarified. But despite the lengthy runtime, it feels like we only got to know so much about these characters. While in terms of acting, they're all fine for the most part, plus they all have some fun with their roles and have a few emotional scenes here and there. This movie's more action-based than character-based. Of the newer X-Men, the ones we get to know the most are Cyclops and Jean. We get reintroduced to Havoc from First Class, once again played by Lucas Till, and it reveals that he and Cyclops are brothers, and we see a little bit of their relationship explored. And as far as Jean goes, there are some hints about how powerful she really is, as we see in a few scenes between her and Xavier, and we see how she doesn't seem to always have control of her powers, setting the stage for Dark Phoenix, which we'll get to in another video. The film takes a detour in the second act where William Stryker enters the scene, kidnaps some of the X-Men, and the younger mutants go to rescue them, where we get a Wolverine cameo. And while I always enjoy seeing Hugh Jackman, and the action here was a lot of fun, when you think about it, this ultimately had little to no bearing on the plot whatsoever. It just seemed like a way to keep some of the X-Men busy for a half hour or so until we get to the final fight. From a purely entertainment perspective, I enjoyed it. The action's really well done and is probably some of the most brutal Wolverine action we've seen, at least up until Logan, but it seemed more like a fan service moment than anything that actually contributes to the story. From a narrative perspective, this could have been cut and reworked, so we could have used this time to get more character development for everyone else. Now let's talk about Apocalypse himself. Easily the worst part about this movie. From a CGI standpoint, this is the worst looking thing I've seen in any of the X-Men films. I haven't read the comics, so I'm not even mad that he doesn't look exactly the way he did in the comics. I know his original look is similar to Thanos, and I know Thanos was already introduced in the MCU at this point, so I'm sure Fox was trying to make a distinction between the two. But as the whole internet joked about back then, he looks more like Ivan Ooze from the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers movie, except if he took himself seriously. We're supposed to be frightened of this guy, yet he looks ridiculous. And in terms of writing, he's also bad. He's just this evil guy who wants to rule the world, and he has no personality of his own. Sure, he thinks humanity's failed, and he views himself as the savior, but that's explored in like, what, 1 or 2 lines? Most of the time he stands there and attempts to look menacing, and he'll threaten people, but that's about it. He's just a boring character. The only thing worse than him might be the fake Deadpool from X-Men Origins. For the film's title character, he was one of the worst parts about this movie, and it was a huge waste of Oscar Isaac, who's an incredibly talented actor, and he didn't even give a bad performance. He just had next to nothing to work with, and it's a shame. But as I mentioned, the performances in general are fine for the most part. Michael Fassbender as Magneto is once again easily the biggest standout. Even though his character development isn't explored during the entire film, he's given the most to do, and he once again brings out Magneto's badass side. There's especially one scene where he's in the woods early on that I loved, and is probably one of my favorite Magneto moments in any of the movies. James McAvoy is once again fantastic as Xavier. We do get to explore a little bit of what's going on inside his head as he's taught himself how to deal more with hearing everyone's thoughts, which was a solid story arc, even if, like everything else, it wasn't a huge focus of the film. But we get reintroduced to Moira McTaggart, played once more by Rose Byrne, and her memories from First Class have been wiped, but the X-Men need her help because she's the one who accidentally reawakens Apocalypse. And while I like Rose Byrne, and I think she did a fine job both here and in First Class, her character is given so little to do here. While she does help the X-Men throughout this, she's kind of just there, and really there isn't much to her character. Even when we dive into Xavier trying to deal with her no longer remembering anything from First Class, it's only explored in a couple of scenes. It felt like there was more that could have been done there. Everyone else was enjoyable though. I especially like Jennifer Lawrence returning as Mystique, and Nicholas Hoult as Beast was also nice to see again, as was Evan Peters as Quicksilver. My favorite performances of the newer X-Men were Cody Smith-McPhee as Nightcrawler, as he made for some fun comic relief, as well as Alexandria Shipp as Storm, who's somewhat tricked into joining Apocalypse's team. Though the two I thought were only okay were Tye Sheridan as Cyclops and Sophie Turner as Jean Grey. This film is supposed to start planting the seeds for their romance down the line, and we see them have these little snappy back and forth exchanges, but I didn't really buy their chemistry, nor did I really think their delivery came off as anything compelling. It all felt a little forced. Now, despite a lack of substance in terms of characters, as I've said, the action scenes are all at least very well done, and they're what makes this fairly entertaining. Even though we're not as emotionally invested because Apocalypse is such a weak character, the film at least does a good job of going bigger and bigger with the action as the story progresses. The action scenes in the beginning were solid, and the scale only keeps increasing. The final third of the movie was actually a lot of fun, and it's this all-out war between the X-Men and Apocalypse and the Four Horsemen. This is probably one of the only times where the film had this epic feel, and it seemed as if it was trying to one-up what they did in Days of Future Past, which I still like that movie more. While earlier parts of the movie felt slow, this is where it's at its quickest. Some of the CGI can look a little cheesy, but the way some of these fights were choreographed and the way they tried making them feel grandiose, I was entertained. This is a very mixed bag, and I can see why people say they don't like it. For what should have been the start of a new era for the X-Men franchise, it turns out to be a disappointment. While there were some intriguing storylines brought up, it has nowhere near the amount of depth that 1, 2, First Class, or Days of Future Past had, and it has easily one of the weakest villains in the movies with Apocalypse himself. Still, the performances are once again strong from its very talented cast, plus the action scenes are very exciting. It's not a bad movie, but it's pure entertainment and nothing more. X-Men Apocalypse gets a 6.5 out of 10. Up next, we get the Logan, and I'm very excited to talk about that as I actually haven't seen it since I first saw it in theaters, so I'm way overdue for a rewatch. I'll also be reviewing Netflix's Enola Holmes, which is out tomorrow, and that should be fun. So all that and more, coming soon. But let me know, did you see X-Men Apocalypse, or are you planning to see it, and what were your thoughts? Did you like the action? Did you like all the new characters getting introduced? And what was your favorite performance in an X-Men movie? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it, and for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll catch you next time.